Hi, I'm Jean Ann Duckworth, and welcome to the first in a series. I've debated about what to call this series. Uh, I came up with a Wednesday wisdom for women, but that was so saccharine it made me feel a little queasy. What I originally was going to call it is Message in a Closet, because the closet is where I come to record these things. I was going to put stuff up, material and things to hide it, but you know what? You need to see that this is where I do these messages here in my closet. I wanted my ministry, this new ministry, to be an evolution. And in order for it to evolve, you have to see its humble beginnings. So, that being said, this is my weekly message in a closet. Eventually, once we get a brick and mortar place to be able to do ministry, I hope to have a Wednesday worship service, and then I'll be doing the messages there, but I'll still do them online for you. That being said, every month I plan on having a topic, and I decided, or the Lord decided for me, that the topic for September would be change. I'm going through certain changes, not like that. The problem with talking about change as a woman is everybody thinks you mean that change, and I don't. Um, Starting this ministry, um, trying to find a place to be able to do it. Anyway, you don't want to hear all that. We're not going to talk about that here. Change. If you were to talk to people about the things that they're most frightened of when people take surveys, public speaking and flying seem to come really high on the list. Death usually comes pretty high, whether it's your own or of someone for whom you care. Surprisingly, change never makes the list as far as I've ever seen. It makes the list in when an anonymous way. Like if someone passes away in your family, that's a change. But no one says, I'm afraid of change. But people are afraid of change. We get very comfortable with the status quo, with the way things are. We find a way to do it, and we stick with it. We don't even have to think about it anymore. I think back to trying to teach my daughter to drive, and you have to think about what it is you're doing because it's automatic. And life gets to be like that. We just kind of run on autopilot, and we don't want anything to change, anything that might upset our routine, a routine we've grown very accustomed to. But now's the time of year to think about change. I know most people tend to think about making changes in their life in January. And I personally think that is the worst possible time of the year, especially for women. We've just gone through the holidays. We're absolutely exhausted. Many of us end up sick with some kind of bug because we're so exhausted. And yet we're trying to fulfill these New Year's resolutions that no one could do. All the Avengers put together couldn't manage to get them done, but we think we're going to. Yeah. Rather than January, I've got a whole different thing for that. When I think of change, I think of September. I think of September because traditionally September is the beginning of autumn. Now, I live in Southern California, so there really isn't much of an autumn. We just kind of fade from the hot, dry season to the cooler, kind of wet season. And the worst of the summer is still ahead of us. October tends to be one of the hottest months here in Southern California. But I grew up in St. Louis, and before we moved here, we lived in Southern Illinois. So I am well acquainted with autumn. I know that feel of watching the leaves slowly turn and then fall off the trees, and the weather starting to get a little crisper. The sunlight, you stand in the sun and it feels warm, but you step in the shade and you feel it. You can just feel it. And when I lived in Southern Illinois, hearing the geese, the Canadian geese fly overhead because they would spend their winters in our area. The kids go back to school. Those change. We change clothes. We put away the flip-flops and the shorts and the capri pants, and we get out and the tank tops, and we get out the sweaters and the leggings and boots. We make changes. We turn off the AC and we make sure that the furnace is ready to go. Sorry, it's a little warm in the closet today. Lemonade. Yeah. Change. Autumn brings change. The leaves change. Temperature changes. Some changes are natural and some changes we do. So now's the time to think about change. What kind of changes do you want to make in your life? What is it that you've longed to do but haven't done? Somebody on Twitter the other day asked if I forget how old she was, 40s, 50s, if it was too late for her to pursue a PhD. And I think of the Ann Landers' Dear Abby answer, if you don't do it in 3 years, how old are you going to be? You'll be 3 years older and you won't have your PhD. If you start school now, in 3 years, you'll be 3 years older and you'll have a doctor in front of your name. Change. I talk about change because Scripture's full of change. The Bible tells stories of change, all kinds of change. Adam and Eve went from the garden to a rather harsh way of life. Israel went out of bondage and wandered in the wilderness for 40 years to be able to form a nation, and then started their own nation. And of course, the biggest change was when Jesus came and just kind of turned everything slightly on its ear, but in a good way. I liked it. I wanted to do today as an introduction. I probably will do an introduction every month for the topic, and then 3 or 4 weeks of scripture and a message based on that. But I did want a scripture. And of course, when you think of scripture and you think of change and so on, I had to be corny enough to go to Ecclesiastes 3 that I am not going to read to you because I find it to be a tad on the dark side, but it does start out quite simply with oops, back a page, cheating. For everything there's a season and a time for every matter under heaven. And there is. And this is a season of autumn, and autumn means change. You can say, well, things change in the spring, but see, spring is about birth, rebirth. Autumn is about change. It's about things changing, and it's signaling to us